Jai Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Jaya Girivaradhari Jaya Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Jaya Girivaradhari Jaya Girivaradhari Jaya Yashodanandana Jaya Brajajanaranjana Jaya Yashodanandana Jaya Brajajanaranjana Jaya Yamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Yamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Nitai Gaura Haribo 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 Nitai Gaura Haribo Shri Radha Ranath ki, Shri Giraj Govardhan Hari ki, Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Shri Nitai Gaur Premanande. So again, Hare Krishna everyone. Thank you so much for joining this morning, and thank you so much for the honor of presenting this class. Today we are discussing Srila Prabhupada's Transcendental pastimes, and we'll begin with prayers to our spiritual masters for their blessings. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gyanangana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Shtapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Katahmayam Dadati Swapadantikam Namam Vishnupadaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Shamate Bhaktivedanta Swami Nitinamine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschati Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakti Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanshakapatrabhyascha Kripasindhubevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So I also pray for all your blessings for our discussions this morning, so that we can appreciate Srila Prabhupada's glories and teaching so much more. Our setting is Iran, Tehran in particular. It's the 9th of August, 1976. Volume 4, Chapter 1. Okay. In the morning, Srila Prabhupada walked in the park again. The park is basically a carefully constructed, carefully sculpted hillside, attractively terraced and well maintained by what seems to be an overabundance of attendants. So people who were cleaning the area and were quite interested in the elderly Swami and his disciples. After being driven to the top of the hill, Prabhupada entered the deserted enclosure and gradually made his way down the winding pathways to the bottom where the car was waiting. About halfway down, Prabhupada sat for a while on a bench in a small arbor of shrubs and lattice work. So an arbor is like a shelter that's usually made up of trees and climbing plants, but in this case is also made up of man-made structures. Lattice, which is wooden or cement intertwining structures, looks like a trellis. While we, his small following of disciples, sat around him on the ground. A few groundsmen looked on, somewhat bemused. Though not physically strong, Prabhupada's vigor for speaking Krishna Katha has not diminished. He kept up a running discourse, observing that men in general, because of godlessness, have become dishonest. He's dishonest to himself even, doesn't take care of the body properly. Harav abhaktasya kuto mahad guna. Therefore, you cannot expect good qualities of the human society without injecting God consciousness. So this is something that we don't think about very often, because in that very entrenched and perverted sense of false ego, we think that this body is ours and ours to abuse. So it will be a running theme in our discussion this morning about how everything belongs to Krishna, including these bodies. So when we eat irresponsibly, when we take up bad habits like smoking and act recklessly, driving under the influence of alcohol or speeding, engaging in violence, all these activities are actually what Prabhupada says, us being dishonest to ourselves. So if we are so terrible to ourselves, how can we be expected to be of any good to anyone else? Another point that Srila Prabhupada brings to our attention in chapter 17 of Bhagavad Gita is that when we misuse the body, we're not just being terrible to ourselves, but also to the super soul within. We're actually torturing the super soul. So this is what Srila Prabhupada is speaking about here. He asked Atreya Rishi if there was much fighting between the Iranian people. Not so much, Atreya Rishi told him. They are not as peaceful as Indians, they are not as pious as Indians. Accepting his judgment, Prabhupada said, there cannot be. In India, still you'll find hundreds and thousands of men are going to take bath in the Ganges in the morning. They might have only one cloth and one napkin, right? So one upper cloth and one lower cloth. Still they will take bath with the napkin, the lower cloth. They change the cloth, that is the top cloth, and wash it and spread it on the ground. By the time he finishes his bathing, the cloth is dry. This is that is India's advantage. And he puts on some fresh cloth and the napkin is also dry. And he'll become refreshed. And in his lota, he'll take some water of the Ganges and he'll go home. In Vrindavan, you'll find many thousands in the morning with lota. They go out, evacuate somewhere, and then wash hands, mouth with cloth, bathing in the Ganges and Yamuna. So the importance here is that the people of Bharat Bhumi, they're living alongside these holy waters. And their constant bathing in these waters, Srila Prabhupada tells us in Srimad Bhagavatam, ensures that they're always being purified of their sins. And even though Prabhupada also says it takes a long time to get purified by this method, let's say they have that time because they're living alongside the rivers. And therefore Srila Prabhupada says that they're much more pious than people who don't have that privilege, like the people of Iran or anywhere else in the world for that matter. So even though they're living so simply, just 2 pieces of cloth, not much else in the world, but their consciousness, and therefore the kinds of people that they are, it's on a much higher level than anyone else. On another level though, when we read about this, we should understand that we shouldn't only depend on holy baths in order to be washed of the sins, because Maharaj Parikshit says it's a bit counterproductive because we go on sinning after we've taken the bath. So he compares it to an elephant. Elephant takes a bath, becomes clean, then goes on to the riverbank, rolls in the mud, becomes dirty again. Rinse, repeat. So what we want is to stop sinning altogether, right, by a transformation of heart. And that's accomplished by the practices of devotional service. Then the caution is that in the course of our devotional service, we try to become free of offenses to the service itself, to devotees, to the holy name, because then we'll be engaging in the services, but causing these offenses, taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. So basically it must always be forward motion. We must always be trying to purify ourselves in the most effective and efficient way. So if we're engaging in the chanting of the holy names and hearing, which is what Prabhupada advises in Srimad Bhagavatam to be more transformative than even bathing in holy waters, to accomplish that transformation in the shortest time, that we should do it with concentration and without offense. Then we can be assured that the process is most efficient. Thinking of a recent newspaper article that criticized the mentality of pilgrims who go to bathe in the Yamuna even though the government has declared its waters polluted, he added, now they are polluting the Yamuna water, the government. In Vrindavan, government is opening oil refinery and people are being encouraged. These are new temples. Everywhere people are being degraded. They have no tendency to become purified, God-conscious, honest, because they do not believe in the next birth. So basically because they don't believe there's any consequences. You can escape the government in this birth, so most people think they can do as they want. But you can't escape the karma of what you're doing, not to yourself, to your own body, to others, and not from the destruction of the earth either. So it's not the pollution by so many people bathing in the waters that's the problem. People have been bathing in the waters of the Yamuna and Ganga from the beginning of time. But there was never pollution. That's because these holy waters are there for our purification, both on the outside and on the inside. Even the amount of sins that are being dumped into the Yamuna in this Kali Yuga are sorted out by the Lord. He arranges that pure devotees will come and relieve the rivers of these sins. The problem is abuse of the environment. And like Prabhupada says, the factories and the industries that are polluting the Yamuna. Still, it remains pure, and Srila Prabhupada is commenting that it's actually those that are advising the pilgrims not to bathe that are wrong, not the pilgrims who are still bathing in the waters. But nevertheless, there will be consequences for polluting these holy sources of water. There are those who can criticize us that we're against progress if we're against factories and industries. But if this progress is actually destroying the earth that we have been gifted by the Supreme Lord to exist on, then that progress is actually regress in another form. It's the biggest trick of Maya to convince us that such progress is good for us. It's destruction. So, Srila Prabhupada hints to the solution that we have to become purified, God-conscious and honest. Someone who is purified either by bathing over a long time, engaging in the activities of devotional service with earnest hearing and chanting, that person is not going to be driven by the false ego to destroy their own bodies, the bodies of others, or the earth. This is how we can be ensured of the best outcome. So, the particular point in this age is that since we can't be certain that our chanting is always pure when we're chanting at home or by ourselves, when we come together, so many people chanting, then there's a greater chance that someone there is actually chanting purely, and we'll be benefited by hearing from them. Otherwise, someone could say, I could engage in these processes at home, what's the benefit of coming to the temple? But we are being uplifted by everyone else, and we're also uplifting the environment. As Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu told Srila Haridas Thakur, the trees will be benefited, insects, the animals, anything and everything that hears the chanting or hears the discussions on Srimad Bhagavatam. So this is the ultimate welfare or environmental work, right, that anyone can be engaged in. Prabhupada observed that men were creating bad situations by falsely claiming proprietorship over natural resources, although these things were made by God. Navayovana said that the Shah had just recently stated that all the forests and natural resources were made by God and that no man could make these things. But his conclusion was not correct, he added. He said, therefore, these things are owned by the government, which represents the people. He didn't understand. Srila Prabhupada has always supported the idea of a just monarchy as the best means of rule, and he approved the Shah saying such a thing, but with a strong proviso. So whereas the disciple Navayovana is trying to say that the Shah was wrong in claiming all the natural resources made by God, Srila Prabhupada is saying that the monarchy should actually manage these things. That's fine. Right? But they shouldn't claim ownership. It belongs to God. This is accepted. And everyone is God's son. Therefore, as the son can enjoy the father's property. But they cannot claim proprietorship. So the importance of this is when we keep that mentality in mind all the time, that this belongs to the Supreme Lord, that it is His, it was created by Him, it's for Him, then we'll be less likely to misuse it like we've been speaking about. Knowing that something belongs to someone else makes you a little more careful over it, right? If you borrow something, or if you have something in your possession that belongs to someone. So in this way, if we are always conscious that everything belongs to the Supreme Lord, then it should lead us to take care of it better and use it for Him, right? For the person who created it. This is also a theme that will come through a bit later on. This is the correct position. And the king is supposed to be a representative of God to see that the things are rightly going on. That's all. Right? So there's nothing wrong with the king administering these things. Right? He's called Naradeva because he represents the Supreme Personality of Godhead on earth. Because the tendency of human beings is to misuse everything. And so there must be someone, some authority that gives them direction. Right? But it's also, of course, important that the monarchy is responsible. This is what Srila Prabhupada brings out here also. It is God's property, whatever you take, but you cannot take more. Like the birds and beasts, they are living. They do not make stock. They need to eat something. They'll eat some fruit, then they go away. When they are hungry, they will go to another tree. They never claim that this is my tree, this is my fruit. This is natural. If you put a bag of rice here, the birds will come, they will eat some grains and go away. But a man, he'll go and try to stock something and he will take more. So this is the human tendency. This is the difference between us, intelligent beings, right, and the lower beings. But they say, right, so the disciple is challenging the point to Prabhupada, but they say that's intelligence, I said, to make preparation for the future. And so Prabhupada replies, yes, to steal God's property is certainly intelligence. Srila Prabhupada replied sardonically, very good intelligence, they must suffer. For this intelligence, they must be punished. So the point is, there's a very famous saying, that there is enough in abundance for everyone's need and not everyone's greed. The problem is that human beings don't know where to draw the line. Even in the ancient systems, there was an understanding that you could harvest for the winter and so on, but there was never this mass stockpiling of things that get rotten or get wasted and so on, because we actually don't understand how much we really need. To actually stockpile things is to encourage the mentality of Kali. We remember that Maharaj Parikshit, he was influenced by Kali, Kali's quarrel and hypocrisy. He was influenced by Kali because of his accumulation of gold. He gave Kali residence in the accumulation of gold. Prabhupada didn't want us to accumulate things, both from a monetary perspective, unnecessarily. And then we also know from the spiritual perspective, Rupa Goswami tells us that atyahara is an impediment to devotional service. And that's not just stocking possessions or prasadam in the freezer, but it's also knowledge. You accumulate knowledge unnecessarily, and unnecessarily means not in the service of the Lord, maybe just to look smart and so on. That's atyahara. It's an obstacle to devotional service. So, unnecessarily accumulating anything is not good for the serious spiritualist. Ultimately, what we want is by engaging in devotional service sincerely, with our attentive hearing, with our pure chanting, to have that intelligence, that natural and determined intelligence develop, where we know exactly what's enough for us, what we need, so that we don't make the mistake of atyahara. And before we come to that level, we should ask someone who has that intelligence to guide us. Right? This is what we have spiritual systems for. Srila Prabhupada's statement that the son has the right to enjoy the father's property made me think about an argument my mother had once used in an exchange of letters with me. Her outlook was that of a typical karmi. Their idea is that God may have made everything, but now it's for us to divide up and enjoy between us. He has no connection with it now. That's a Prabhupada questions. Why? He has made and he has no connection? Prabhupada asked. What is this rascal theory? He has made everything and he has no connection. No, he gives up the connection, I said. Why he gives up? He has made for his enjoyment. Why should he give up? They say that he's made for our enjoyment and it's for us to divide and enjoy. So this is a very interesting point that Srila Prabhupada makes. And Srila Prabhupada actually, in these debates, he talks a lot on the basis of logic, rather than just quoting scripture. Because people can quote scripture and manipulate it in the way that they want, but you can't argue with logic. And one logical point that comes up from this is that if everything around us is meant to bring us enjoyment, why does enjoyment always lead to so much negative consequences? Shri Shri Radha Radhanath ki, Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ki, Shri Girish Govardhan Hare ki, Shri Prabhupada ki. If it's all about enjoyment, then when we enjoy eating, it shouldn't cause our body distress or disease like we were speaking about. Our enjoyment of driving shouldn't cause accidents. Our enjoyment of illicit sex shouldn't cause illness, shouldn't cause Varna Shankara. If we're just meant to enjoy gambling, it shouldn't lead to the destruction of homes, careers, family. You can think of it in any scenario. Every enjoyment will have some negative consequence if there's no restriction on it. And if there's restriction on enjoyment, what's the point? So there's obviously a fundamental flaw here in this thinking that everything is just meant for our enjoyment. In fact, it seems to point to us that enjoyment only brings suffering. And that is the conclusion of one who is intelligent or who is developing their intelligence in spiritual life. It's very obvious and it's very logical. No, Prabhupada said emphatically that he means no to the previous point about everything being for our enjoyment. Therefore, you are rascal. Everything is done by somebody. Suppose if you organize one business, that is for your enjoyment. God has created anything. That is for His enjoyment. But you are sons of God, so you can enjoy the property of the Father as far as you require, not more than. You cannot take more than that. Then other sons will claim and there will be fight. You live at the expense of God. God has sufficient supply, but don't try to take more and stock. That is folly. You eat, you live very nicely, there is no prohibition, but you cannot take more than what you require. This is Bhagavat communism. If you take more, you'll be punished. So, Srila Prabhupada is referencing the first verse of Sri Ishopanishad, and he'll actually quote the Sanskrit of that verse in the next paragraph. But basically, that Vedic knowledge comes with the earth in order to teach us how to use the earth properly. And central to that is knowing what's your quota and living within it. So someone may argue, well, Prabhupada just said that there's no shortage of supply. Everything is unlimited in the spiritual sense, and it's true. But in order to qualify us to attain the spiritual platform where everything is unlimited, you have to learn to live within your limits and prove yourself here. This material world is not a place for our enjoyment. We need to get that mentality out of our heads. It's a test for us to prove that we can live without lust, anger, and greed. Right? Lust for people, greed for things, and the anger that results when we don't get either. And then when we have demonstrated our responsibility, then we actually gain entrance into the spiritual platform where there is abundance. But you won't misuse it because you're not subject to all these bad qualities anymore. So nothing in this material world is actually meant for enjoyment. It's meant for teaching us how to live within our limits. Once again, he glorified Indian heritage. This is our philosophy, Krishna consciousness. Tena tyaktena bhunjita. That's a verse from Sri Ishopanishad. The Indians are trained up like that. He is happy in whatever condition of life he is placed. He doesn't protest. Any Indian villager, he'll say, God has given me this position, that's all right. Therefore, the modern man is complaining that in India, this God consciousness has made them lethargic. Right? They believe on the destiny. And actually, they do. So, the bottom line is that in the Vedic culture, there was no over-endeavor, unnecessarily expending your time and your energy to accumulate all these things that will actually just lower your consciousness. Because you give in to greed, lust, anger, all these other base qualities, and then your enjoyment still brings you disease and problems. Again, very counterproductive. So people were satisfied with what they had, with whatever the Supreme Personality of Godhead granted them, and so they were on a much higher level of consciousness, even if they were living simply, right? As villagers, or as Prabhupada said earlier on, with just 2 pieces of cloth. They're not interested in increasing the unnecessary items, I said. Prabhupada nodded. That's it. Why? If there is already sufficient supply of my necessities of life, why shall I waste my time? They knew how to utilize time. Because all that time you save from endeavoring, you can utilize to answer the questions of life, right? Why you're here, what the point of this world is. And you can make progress in spiritual knowledge, and that's the perfect system. Navayovana joined in, extending my argument. They say that God has no need to enjoy. That's different. Prabhupada's reaction was as humorous as it was emphatic. Beat him with shoes on his face. Because he has created, Prabhupada means God, and he has no need to enjoy. Why he has created? He's your father's servant that he's created for you. It reminds me when you're growing up and you're late for school and your parents would say, do you think it's your grandfather's school? And so Prabhupada's saying, do we think that God is our father's servant to create everything for us? He has created for his enjoyment. That is the tendency everywhere. How can you say that God has simply created for your enjoyment? What is his claim? Right? The claim of the person who's saying that everything is for our enjoyment. Is there any practical example in the world that somebody creates something for others? Why do you claim in this way, which is unusual? A father creates family for his own enjoyment, wife, children. He wants enjoyment, society, family. Therefore, he takes the risk of maintaining so many people. Prabhupada's explaining that Krishna wants us to enjoy, but enjoying as part of his family, enjoying responsibly, with him at the center. Then we don't create any bad consequence for ourselves. Where do you get this philosophy that God cannot enjoy? Yes, he doesn't need to enjoy, Navayovana replied. They say because he's not like human beings. Again, Prabhupada gave an example from practical experience. There are so many animals. They are not like human beings. Why they enjoy sex? Can you forbid him that you are not like human being, you cannot enjoy? This is all nonsense philosophy, because they do not know what is God, what he is, what is his position, relationship. Therefore, these nonsense things are said. So, we're looking at more logic here. When we learn more about God, we learn about his various names. One of those names is Purushottam. What does Purushottam mean? The supreme enjoyer. Why does he have a name like that if he doesn't enjoy? It's true that he doesn't need to enjoy because he is also the possessor of complete and perfect renunciation. But he can enjoy, and he does enjoy. That's why he has this name. So, Prabhupada's making the point that if we have this knowledge, then we'll understand the nature of God, we'll understand why everything is created, and we'll also understand how we can enjoy in the correct way. Srila Prabhupada put the dearth of knowledge of God down to misleadership in every major field of human endeavor. Philosophy, science, politics, sociology. People were being led by rascals and fools who had no idea of the real welfare of society. As an example, he pointed out that although there's a police department, all kinds of sinful activities are allowed to go on because no one knows what is sinful anymore. So the South African public, I don't need to comment any further on this. We understand this better than most. Dayanand said that they judged everything on the basis of what they thought was good for humanity, and in essence, that was whatever gives pleasure to the greatest number of people. So, we've also discussed this point before, that to some people, pleasure comes from murdering others. To some people, pleasure comes from destroying this body, right, with bad habits. To some people, pleasure comes from driving recklessly and killing others. Our pleasure, our enjoyment is not the criterion for what is good for us. Mostly, our pleasure comes from things that are bad for us. So we always need to be guided, right, by higher knowledge to help us to actually do something that's good for us and others. Prabhupada replied that was a mentality of a child. So Prabhupada's explaining here that the child also only thinks of pleasure, but that pleasure is bad for the child. He gave his own example that he didn't want to go to school when he was a little boy. And it was his mother that forced him by actually employing someone to take Prabhupada to school. So the bottom line is that you can't leave the child to do as he wants, because then he or she won't get an education, which will be bad for them. In the same way, we need to be monitored, guided, right, by those with a higher intelligence and greater responsibility, because otherwise we'll be engaging in pleasures and enjoyments that will be bad for us. So in that leadership, right, the government is needed, the king is needed, the father is needed, the guru is needed, just to guide. Therefore, whatever you think whimsically it is pleasure, the guru, the father, the king, the government, they should guide. No, it is not pleasure, it is ruining. Right? That's what it does. Right? Our ideas of pleasure and enjoyment ruin us. You should take like this. There's a problem though in the modern age. If the guru and the father and the government, they are themselves rascals and fools, how will they guide? And that is the position. General public, they require guidance, but the guides themselves are rascals and fools, cheaters, bluffers. Therefore the social condition is very bad. Prabhupada told us that the leaders were victims of bad upbringing. They have become thieves because their guardians did not care for them. This is going on, parampara, the wrong kind of parampara. The parampara is that God's instructions should be distributed, but there are no followers of God's instructions. Therefore the fools, rascals parampara is there. The father is a rogue and the son is a rogue, the grandson is a rogue. What is wrong? The parampara is rogue. And if they follow God's parampara, then everything is all right. And this is why Srimad Bhagavatam is so emphatic about how the father, the king, the mother, the spiritual master, the relatives, they all need to be qualified before they can guide, lead, or instruct others. It's very important. Otherwise, the social condition will never transform. Children, subordinates, they should be guided towards that higher consciousness by someone who obviously has higher intelligence. So there's responsibility for leaders in every sphere, even if it is just a father. It's nothing like just a father or just a mother, as we can see. But fathers, mothers, husbands, so on, they're all leaders in some way. And they all have a collective responsibility to guide their subordinates towards a higher consciousness, right? To not cause destruction to themselves or others. The difficulty is that they're not following the words of God. And religion means the words of God. It doesn't matter what kind of religion it is. If they actually follow the words of God, they become good. Another katha is going on out there. Just like in the 10 Commandments, the good instructions are there. So what is the wrong there? You follow, you become a good man. Similarly, in Quran also, there are good instruction. You follow, you become a good man. After all, religion means to try to understand God. So if you sincerely want to understand God and follow His instruction, any religion, it doesn't matter, you become a good man. It must be an atheist. Comparatively, according to the time, circumstances may be, just like, who told me? You told me that they cut the throat of the lamb. So suppose that the blood goes to the Mecca side, still there is sense of God, a sense of God. Similarly, if they follow strictly the words of God, so everything is all right. So there are different religious processes that are given to people at different times in history. Eventually, it's meant to elevate everyone to that higher consciousness that we were speaking about, where you don't encroach in anyone else's things, you live as if everything belongs to the Supreme Lord, which it does, and you utilize it for His service. But because not everyone is on the same level, the different religious processes are tailored to those persons. It's not for us to judge, but to understand that if someone is very sincere in following those processes, they will gradually be elevated to the platform of devotional service. That's the point. And Srila Prabhupada will also talk about this a bit later on with regards to meat eating. The problem is that bad leadership, whether it's coming from government or teachers or parents, this is what's distorting the meaning of religion, the purpose of religion. And religion is going from being something that needs to introduce us to the Supreme Lord and help us get to know Him better, to something that must be utilized for our greed, for what we want. Like we've been taught to think of everything the same way. So after that morning walk, Prabhupada rested and he relaxed with his disciples, Parivrajaka Swami, Pradyumna, and the author. And he was talking about the scientists again, right? How they had landed on the moon and they were sampling soil for evidence of life. He said that to accept the moon and Mars as simply stone, sand and desert means we have to reject all the Vedic Shastras. Why is everything simply sand, he asked. Even here we see deserts, mountains, fertile regions, cities, ice, snow and seas, every type of condition and life everywhere. So why not on the moon as well? Laughing, he said that the scientists are so unfortunate that everywhere they go is simply desert. It's quite ironic. He also asked why, if the moon is different from the earth, Mars is the same as the moon. He stressed that our approach is also scientific, that we don't speak anything unscientific. Even if we accept that there's only sand, that means there must have been water originally, for sand is formed from water. So Srila Prabhupada is referencing Srimad Bhagavatam that explains the gradual progression of the elements, that it begins first with sound. Sound is carried by ether, right? So ether develops next. Then comes touch. Touch is carried by air, so air comes from ether. There's form and sight and light, fire and light. And then from there is taste and water, and the last element to be formed is earth and smell. So earth is actually formed from water. So if they found earth on the moon and Mars, Prabhupada is saying there must have been water. And where there is water, there would be vegetation. And from vegetation, there must come other forms of life. So again, logic. Logic, not just speculation of the mind, but logic based on Shastra, right? Based on a Paurashaya, that which is not subject to our defects. The modern scientist version that there was originally gas which liquefied and then became solid agrees with Srimad Bhagavatam's version. So although a lot of science is coming from speculation, right, these points can actually be correlated. So gas is ether essentially, which we said begins the whole process. So gas liquefies, right, air, water, and then becomes solid. It agrees with Srimad Bhagavatam's version, which describes how each of the Pancha Bhuta, the 5 basic material elements, come from the other. Ether, air, fire, water, and then earth. Prabhupada rejected outright my explanation that they say no life can exist on these planets because there is no atmosphere to support it. He said there is no question of there being no atmosphere. There's no atmosphere in the sea, but there's so much of life forms in there. Some kind of atmosphere is present, but it's simply of a different type. Even on the sun there is life, because the living beings there have bodies predominantly made from fire. And then Prabhupada quotes Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, text 23, which says that living entities can actually live anywhere because the soul is not affected by the kind of atmosphere. So where is question of atmosphere influence, Prabhupada asked. Suppose there is rock and sand and always hot weather. That does not mean there cannot be any life. The life is never affected by all these things. Make propaganda about this knowledge. He means discuss it logically and spread this message. People will understand that Krishna consciousness movement is not joking. It is something serious. That boy, Srila Prabhupada's talking about a devotee, was saying that these scientists, they know me. Srila Prabhupada. He's a well-known challenger to science. Parivrajaka Maharaj said that the scientists think that if we have not seen something, it doesn't exist. You have to see from the book, Srila Prabhupada replied, and from Shastra. Seeing from the book is real seeing. What you can see with these blunt eyes. I have seen these navigators, right? So the people who are controlling ships or airplanes. They see in the different plans and books and they direct their ship or airplane accordingly. How can he see where we are going? They have got all plans and directions and altitude, latitude, which direction is going on in front of the pilot. So everything is there. In what position the plane is there, how high it is and how low it is, where it is, everything. On that direction they fly. Otherwise, what can they see with the eyes? Right? A pilot can't actually see much further than he's actually very limited by what he can see, and it's his instruments that are actually guiding him, and his knowledge that he or she has attained before that. Otherwise, a pilot cannot fly, or a captain can't sail a ship based on just vision. Right? It's impossible. On that direction they fly. Otherwise, what can they see with the eyes? At most 10 miles, and it is running at 600 miles. Right? What 10 miles will do them? So, Shastra Chakshushat. Authoritative literature should be the eyes, not these blunt eyes. Here is authority. Nainam dahati pavakaha. You should go to the schools, colleges, and from Bhagavad Gita, give them knowledge. The whole world is in darkness, and these rascals are guiding them. So when we were discussing a preaching point the other day, this point came up about how children are actually starting to question on the same basis, and prove that God exists, or prove that the soul exists, because I can't see them. I can't see it. So there used to be that old joke, do you have a mind? Probably not, because you can't see it. But that's not the only logic that can be applied. There's the whole field of quantum physics, which is apparently the basis of everything that exists. But no one can observe it. It actually can't be observed. So, what to speak of quantum physics is obviously even material, it's the ether. If we can't observe that, how are we going to be able to see the soul, or the super soul for that matter? The bottom line is that just like how the pilot has to accept guidance from his knowledge and from his instruments, we have to accept the higher knowledge to tell us about all these things that we can't see. It's not enough to say that if I can't see it, it doesn't exist. Then you have to reject the actual basis of science, which is quantum physics. You can't see it, reject it. Logic. As he relaxed on his asana, his thoughts returned to his breakfast. He had taken some more of the neem bhara, so neem leaves, that I had made for him in France, and he asked if Parivrajaka and Pradyumna had tried it. Did you like it? Parivrajaka said it tasted very healthy. Prabhupada is puzzled. Healthy? Parivrajaka smiled. Healthy. It tasted like it was good for me. I interpreted for him. That means that it didn't taste very nice. But we accepted it was good. Parivrajaka laughed. I know by my intelligence that it's good to keep eating even though my tongue was saying stop. So again, this is a problem when we're driven by enjoyment. We enjoy the taste of lots of things that are very bad for us, right, that come out of boxes and cans in the freezer and stuff and have absolutely no prana or life in it. All because of taste. And taste is not a good enough guide. Right? Generally, we're actually destroying ourselves through this. The point that we made in the beginning. So enjoyment, taste, shouldn't be a criteria for what's good for us. Again, this point comes up. So then the author reminisces about how he had to eat Karela for the first time. I could hardly eat it because I had no conception that something bitter could be pleasant. At the time, Prabhupada had laughed and told me it was an acquired taste and that we Westerners had no idea of proper foods. Now he again told us that this neem is good, that if you eat at least 2 leaves of neem daily, you'll never lose your appetite. Appetite will be continuing. So not appetite based on taste, which we said is bad for us, right? But actual good appetite, Prabhupada had said on many occasions, is a sign of good health. Not eating for the sake of it, appetite. So although I've become accustomed to and even gotten to like neem is still a bit hard to take. I laughed. Who can eat 2 leaves of neem? No, if you practice, Prabhupada smiled, it's not impossible. So ultimately, anything that's good for us will be perceived as good for us, right, when we advance to the level of goodness. That's the point. Right? This acquired taste comes the more we advance in our consciousness. When you come to the higher level, doing good things to your own body, for everyone else and for the earth, will be natural. You won't have to think about it, because on the level of goodness, there is knowledge, there's illumination. You understand what's good, right? What's the greater good. When you come to the level of Krishna consciousness, which is even beyond goodness, you know what's the absolute good. That's what we're aiming for. Srila Prabhupada Oh, Parivrajika Maharaj mentioned that neem trees don't grow in Iran. Prabhupada made another of his unusual observations. No tree in the desert weighs tree, all desert. So they can be allowed to eat meat. Otherwise, what they'll eat. So everyone must eat something. So this is the practicality or the logic of spiritual life, right? If there's nothing else to eat, then people can eat meat. Parivrajika described a visit he had made to some villages. Right? So they were basically nomads who lived in the desert, and they had a lot of sheep, and the sheep needed to graze. They would finish all the greenery in one area, and because the greenery was so sparse, they would have to keep moving on to the next area to feed the sheep. Because they're desert people, all they had to eat was the milk of sheep and goats, and sometimes they would camp near a farm and they would have vegetables, sometimes, and then is the meat of sheep. So this is, of course, it's a sign of some bad past life karma, because when one is forced to live on the platform of lower consciousness, namely eating meat, then it's very hard for one to become serious about spiritual life and advance, because spiritual life, like we said earlier, it's the progression for one who's intelligent. So for one who is developing a higher consciousness. So ultimately, people have to eat, but then if it situates them in a lower consciousness, then what's the hope for them? So Srila Prabhupada says, even they eat meat, they can chant Hare Krishna, there's no harm. So that's the mercy of Lord Chaitanya in this age. Even if such people are condemned to such a unfortunate situation, they can still chant Hare Krishna. And then what will happen? Their consciousness will become purified. And they'll have the intelligence to know how else they can subsist without meat. They will develop a lifestyle that will be more conducive towards spiritual life. The Lord will guide them in that way. Chanting can deliver anyone, actually. And then Prabhupada had another alternative. They can have rains from the sky by chanting, congregational chanting. Once again, another benefit of coming together to chant the holy names. Right? We uplift each other, we uplift the environment, we can even cause rains to fall. The rains will fall from the sky. Who can check it? Krishna gives the water from the sky. Yagyat bhavati parjanya. Parivrajikacharya said that 2,000 to 3,000 years ago this region was very thick forest. But since then it has become desert and the rain has stopped. This was because the yagya had stopped, Prabhupada told him. So everywhere the Vedic culture was prominent, but then of course with the influence of Kali, and as the practices of Vedic culture became diminished all across the world, yagya had also diminished, and therefore deserts were the result. Then he added yet another one of his insights as to why the moon could not be desert. The thing is that the more people become sinful, they'll be disturbed by this natural atmosphere, right? Deserts, then people don't find vegetation, they're condemned to eating meat. This is the result of sinful activity, sinful karma. Therefore, I'm surprised, Prabhupada is saying, that the moon planet is inhabited by pious inhabitants. How can there be desert? So again, logic. We know that Krishna says so many times in Bhagavad Gita that the heavenly planets are where pious dwell. They have earned the right to exist on these places of higher enjoyment. So how can there be deserts, places that will cause suffering? It's actually the impious who are suffering here and in the lower regions of the universe. So Prabhupada is bringing to our attention that even without reading masses of scripture, we can actually understand these points so nicely, right, with logic. And this is, it's now our responsibility that understanding in this way, we spread this message, like he described to his disciples. And that will be the best welfare work for society. Okay, so this is where this chapter ends. Srila Prabhupada ki. Are there any questions or comments or corrections? Prabhu? Yes, sir.
You're speaking about how the super soul is affected within when one performs austerities that are not prescribed in the scriptures, then it harms the body. And that is how you like kind of being dishonest, as you were quoting Srila Prabhupada. And therefore it is important for us to, perform austerities on days that are prescribed. Sometimes devotees, just don't eat and think, well, you know what, I'm just performing some austerity. But that austerity is harming the body and the super soul within. So we must be conscious of that, because we had a serious problem once in South Africa with some devotees, anyway, I don't want to get into the details, but they were asked to fast. And, not on prescribed days, and they were just not eating. And then they became like demonic. So, and that had to be rectified. I myself even went there. So, sometimes you have to be very cautious about this, harming ourselves. And we have to take care of the body. Therefore, when we get sick, we're meant to start taking care of the body and leaving spiritual life aside. You take care of the body. So that's very important. I thought I'll make that comment. Thank you, Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much.
Right, time is up now.
Just a quick comment. So back then, many years ago, I used to do all sort of nonsense, drinking, smoking, partying, going to nightclubs and all that stuff. But when I came to Krishna consciousness, I realized that this is Krishna's property. So we have to take out Krishna's property, and we have to nurture it, and we have to, all that stuff. So this is my realization I have to share with you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Prabhu. Anyone else has any comments or questions? Okay. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki.